Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to look at the qualifier and annotation that can help you narrow down the bean selection used by the auto-wired annotation. So let's look at this logger class here. I'm going to get rid of this required equals false thing, and here if we just look at this set method, we're wiring in the console writer bean to this method. Let's go to the XML here and let's copy that and create a duplicate. So I'll create another one and I'll call it something silly. Now if we run this application now, we get an error, so it's not working. And if we look at the error here, it says that there's no qualifying bean of the right type, and it expected a single match, but it found two possible matches. The weird thing is, sometimes I find that it seems to work with two possible matches. It seems to look at the ID or the name to narrow them down, but I don't know why that is. Maybe it's some quirk of my setup, or I really don't know. So in this case, we've got an error, as I would have expected. And what we can do is we can tag one of these beans and say, yes, we want to use that one in particular. And one way we can do that is, let's go to the XML and look at the beans view here, and I'm going to right click the console writer beans. This is the one that I actually want to wire in. We've got this squirrel, which is the kind of red herring to mix animal names a bit. This is also of type console writer, and we don't want to wire that in. We just want to wire this in, but squirrel is causing ambiguity. If I right click console writer, we can go to beans and insert qualifier element, and for the value of qualifier I'm going to type something like, I don't know, I'm going to make some text up, like to console. It doesn't matter, to console, or yeah, that'll do. So probably you could think of a better name here, but the point is I'm labeling it somehow, basically. And if we look at the source and just do Control-Shift-F to just format this a bit, we can see that it's added a qualifier subtag here in the bean, and it's given it the value to console. And what we can do now is, in a logger class where I use auto-wired, underneath that I can put another attribute called qualifier. I'm going to use the autocomplete, so I'll type the first couple of letters and do Control space and select qualifier, and I'm going to supply this with the string to console. So that's a label that I've just added in my XML, of course. And if I run this now, after saving it, we find that now it works. So by tagging my bean here with the to console qualifier subtag, and by adding that here, we've specified which of the two possible beans we actually want to wire in here. There is another way you can use the qualifier annotation here. You can use it on particular classes. So let's make this file writer property ambiguous, because the file writer class implements the log writer interface, and so does console writer here, that implements log writer. So I'm going to change logger so that it only expects a log writer here. Let's change that to log writer, and this as well, so we don't get an error, and I'll save that. Now if we look at the XML, we've got three possible choices for log writer, because all of these beans implement that interface. And all Spring knows is that it's looking for a bean that implements this interface. So we expect this to fail. Let's see whether it does or not. So I run it, and in fact it works, which is what I was talking about earlier. I'm not really sure why this is working, but I suspect it's looking at this name here, this ID. So let's change this to something completely crazy, like mongoose, and save it. Whoops, save it and run it again. And now indeed we've got an error. So I don't know why auto-wired sometimes seems to narrow down the selection based on ID, and other times that doesn't seem to work. And I'm not clear why that is, but as I say, I think it's best not to rely on it. But now this is completely ambiguous because, well, we've got 3 beans that we could wire in there, and one's called console writer, one squirrel and one mongoose. So none of them seem to fit here. Well, rather I should say all 3 of them fit there, and there's nothing about either one that would help us to pick it out and say, yeah, we should use that one. So what we can do is I can go to File Writer, and if I want this beans only of this class to be wired in there, then I can add a qualifier attribute here. So I'm going to type, I'm going to type a qualifier attribute, and let's put in here in speech marks File Writer, and let's add the input for that as well. In fact, sometimes I find to get this to work, it seems to help if we use autocomplete. So I'll do Control Space now, hit return. There we go. We've got the right input now added automatically. And I'm going to add File Writer here. And then in Logger, here again, I'm going to add a qualifier underneath auto wired for this particular property. So I'm going to put qualifier and File Writer so that that matches the qualifier on the class here. And if I run this now, it now works. So this might be starting to seem confusing because we're talking about multiple interfaces and multiple beans and stuff, but the idea is pretty simple really. It's just that if you've got multiple possible beans that could be fitted into here because they all have the right type, but they all have the right parent type, but there's some particular child class that you want to wire in, you can go to that child class or to the class that implements the appropriate interface and flag a particular class with a qualifier, and then you will only wire beans of that particular exact class into here, because only those beans have this qualifier. And I've only got one bean in here of that particular class that has that particular qualifier, and so only that can be wired into here. And of course the type matches because it implements this interface. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. As I say, I don't know what's going on with that weirdness whereby sometimes auto-wired can seem to narrow down bean selection and other times not, but definitely best, in my view at least, to treat auto-wired as though it's purely looking at the type, because then you won't go wrong. So that's it for this tutorial, and until next time, happy coding.